Welcome back to SSNN Network. I am Kranky. Tonight, we're doing something a little different. Instead of simply reporting the news, we're going to react to a fascinating discussion that aired on CNN NewsNight with Abby Phillip. The topic is a software error in New Jersey that mistakenly registered approximately 6,600 non-citizens to vote. Governor Mickey Sherrill says fewer than 400 of those individuals cast ballots. State officials found no evidence that the outcome of any election changed, and the software vendor responsible has been replaced. Those are the reported facts. The debate begins when the panel starts asking a much bigger question. Does this represent widespread election fraud? Or does it demonstrate that government mistakes can be corrected through transparency and accountability? Let's watch.
Governor of New Jersey, Mickey Sherrill, revealing that a software glitch had added over 6,000 non-citizens to the state's voter rolls.
In June of 2023, nearly 3 years before I became governor, a serious software error in New Jersey's motor vehicle system led to the improper voter registration of what we believe to be roughly 6,600 people in our state. In the case of this error, some individuals indicated that they weren't citizens and weren't eligible to vote, but the software registered them anyway.
The governor said that about 400 of those people cast ballots, but there's no evidence at this time that any elections were swayed. She made the surprise disclosure just days after President Trump's address to the nation, where he claimed that hundreds of thousands of non-citizens are on the rolls across the country. Sherrill promised accountability and said that the vendor responsible for the system is being replaced.
Okay, let's begin with something that I think everyone watching can agree on. This is a serious mistake. No matter what political party you belong to, nobody wants people who aren't eligible to vote mistakenly appearing on voter rolls. That shouldn't happen. But here's what immediately caught my attention. Governor Sherrill didn't deny the problem. She acknowledged it publicly. According to the report, the state investigated the issue, determined that fewer than 400 affected individuals cast ballots, found no evidence that the election outcome changed, and replaced the software vendor responsible. That's important because transparency builds public confidence. Now let's see where the political disagreement begins.
The White House obviously seized on the news to help push Trump's voter ID bill, writing, quote, "Democrat glitch registers thousands of non-citizens to vote. Another reason to pass the Save America Act." This is obviously not a great situation. She acknowledged that. But it also doesn't demonstrate that there's widespread voter fraud in New Jersey or anywhere.
In New Jersey? 6,600 non-citizens made it onto the voter rolls. That's okay. To me, is pretty widespread voter fraud.
That's widespread?
Wow. Let's stop right there. Jesse Arm just introduced two words that completely changed the discussion: widespread and fraud. Those aren't just descriptive words. They're politically and legally significant. Notice what he's arguing. He's not saying the election was stolen. He's arguing that if roughly 6,600 non-citizens were mistakenly added to the voter rolls, then the underlying problem is widespread, regardless of whether those registrations changed the election outcome. That's a very specific argument. But watch what Abby Phillip does next. She doesn't dispute that the registrations occurred. She challenges whether the available evidence supports calling the problem widespread. Let's listen.
So where's the proof that it's widespread?
6,600 non-citizens made it onto the voter rolls.
That is 0.006% of registered voters in the state. Mickey Sherrill, she won her
I don't think it invalidates her
She won
election.
her election by 500,000 votes. There were 3.3 million ballots cast in that election. 400 ineligible voters, let's say, because we don't even know, let's say they all voted for her, which maybe they did.
Yeah, it still
maybe
wouldn't invalidate the election.
That would be about 1/100% of all the votes cast. Yeah. Widespread?
Yeah, 6,600 non-citizens made it onto the voter rolls. That's pretty bad. I think.
Hold on, widespread.
Yeah.
6,600 people who were inadvertently registered to vote. The vast majority of them never cast a ballot, and you're calling 400 maybe ballots cast by people who were registered as Republicans, as Democrats, as independents, as widespread in a state where there are 6.8 million registered voters?
Yeah, I'm with the governor of New Jersey on this. I think it's a pretty big problem.
That math doesn't math, Jesse.
Well, I didn't say it invalidated Mikey Sherrill's election result.
I didn't say you said that, but I also dispute the idea that there's any proof that this is widespread.
I think there are thousands of non-citizens on the voter rolls in New Jersey, and I'm pretty concerned about that. I would call it a widespread problem. I think the bigger problem here is that...
What's your definition of widespread, by the way?
This, in my opinion, is the strongest exchange in the entire discussion. Of course, the debate is no longer about what happened. It's about language. What does widespread actually mean? Is it measured by the number of registrations, the percentage of registered voters, the number of ballots cast, or whether the outcome of an election changed? Those are different standards. And unless everyone is using the same definition, people can talk past each other while believing they're having the same conversation. That's why Abby Phillip keeps pressing for a definition instead of simply accepting the label. Now, the conversation shifts again from definitions to accountability.
I'll tell you why I think this conversation is wrong. Because, first of all, this is not the worst possible conversation. This is actually a very good conversation for Democrats because Mikey Sherrill did exactly the right thing. She was transparent.
That's all I was saying.
Let me finish. She was transparent.
And it was good.
She was transparent. She was accountable. She immediately held the people accountable. She removed the software vendor, and she criticized the former governor, who was a Democrat, criticized the former governor for failing to address the problem. That's exactly what a responsible leader is supposed to do.
I think Keith Boykin raises a point that's worth separating from partisan politics. Imagine if the governor had hidden this. Imagine if this software error came to light years later through a whistleblower or leaked documents. The public reaction would almost certainly have been far more severe. Instead, according to the discussion, the administration acknowledged the mistake, investigated it, and replace the software vendor. You can still debate whether more should be done. You can still ask tough questions, but transparency deserves recognition regardless of which party is in office. Now let's hear the next argument because it introduces another important distinction.
The opposite of what Donald Trump did when he lost the 2020 election, and he told the people in Georgia he needs to find 11,780 votes, which, by the way, is voter fraud. This is not an issue about whether it's widespread or not. It's not, because it's really a question about, is it even fraud? This was not fraud. This was a mistake. People were given an option. Are you a U.S. citizen or not? They said no, but the computer system incorrectly registered them to vote. They didn't do anything of their own.
That's a fair point.
Fraud required them to do something on their own purposely to defraud the system.
The suggestion that this is fraud suggests that these people were trying to vote.
Let's pause again. I think we've reached the heart of the disagreement. Up to this point, everyone appears to accept that the software made a mistake. The disagreement is over how we should interpret the consequences of that mistake. One argument is straightforward. If individuals honestly indicated they were not US citizens, yet the state's computer system registered them anyway, then the initial failure belongs to the system, not necessarily to those individuals. That's why one panelist argues this should be viewed primarily as a government or a software error rather than intentional voter fraud. The opposing view is different. It says that regardless of how the registrations occurred, some ineligible people ultimately cast ballots. From that perspective, citizens are justified in asking whether the election system has sufficient safeguards to prevent errors from reaching the ballot box, Notice something important. The panel isn't arguing over whether the software malfunctioned. They're arguing over what lessons should be drawn from that malfunction. Should it be viewed as evidence that the system ultimately worked because the error was discovered and corrected? Or should it be viewed as evidence that the safeguards weren't strong enough in the first place? That's the question now driving the discussion. Let's see how they conclude.
Listen, there's been a lot of work done on situations like this. And going back, state by state, you can go state by state. There have been cases that have looked at it. They found, maybe a couple of dozen cases over the course of 10 years, 20 years. Sometimes what happens is that when state systems are incorrect, people receive information and they are confused. And they're not voting because
this is a great
they're
point.
not voting because they're trying to defraud the system. They might have cast a ballot because they just weren't aware that they were incorrectly put on the voter roll.
Okay, let's stop there for a moment. I think the discussion has now moved into another important area. It's no longer simply about voter registration, it's about intent. One of the points being raised is that not every ineligible vote necessarily begins with an attempt to cheat. According to the discussion, there have been situations where people received information from the government, believed they were eligible, and later discovered they weren't. If that's true, then at least some of these cases may involve confusion rather than deliberate deception. But here's where I think the conversation becomes more interesting. Even if someone didn't intend to break the law, shouldn't the election system be designed to prevent that situation from occurring in the first place? That's really the responsibility of government. Citizens shouldn't have to guess whether they're eligible to vote. The system should make that clear. At the same time, election officials have a responsibility to make sure that voter rolls are accurate, current, and secure. So perhaps the real lesson isn't simply about fraud versus mistake. Perhaps it's about building a system that minimizes both intentional abuse and unintended errors. Let's go back to the panel because they now begin discussing whether government incompetence alone is enough to justify broader election reforms and whether this incident supports the arguments being made for the SAVE Act.
Guys, widespread waste, fraud, and abuse doesn't require malice. It can be a product of government incompetence. That's my point from earlier.
Okay, that's a fair point.
You raised the issue.
That's why I said the state of New Jersey spends $60 billion annually. Surely there's a gazillion other examples.
I think it's a fair point that it can be due to the government just being dumb about some of these things or making mistakes. But again, I do think it's whether it is widespread or not
so
matters.
Clearly.
I do think that the numbers actually matter because if the argument is that this is so widespread that you need to override the state's constitutional rights to run their elections, then you have to actually prove that that's
National
actually
voter ID is an 80% favorable issue.
The numbers don't prove this conversation of widespread. Language matters. Saying widespread and fraud, it matters when, to the point that you were making and that you were making, if folks were being honest about the fact that they are not citizens, and yet it was a mistake on behalf of the actual machines, and then the Democrat in office took accountability for it, this is actually modeling making sure that our elections are safe and fair. But what is happening is, in order to ram through the SAVE Act, in order to sow this discord, let me actually finish, to sow this discord that for some reason there's this quote unquote widespread voter fraud in this country, the Republicans, Donald Trump leading this, is taking this honest mistake that Democrats, again, are cleaning up.
Well, clearly it's a credible argument because this mistake was in place.
All right, we're going to leave it there.
Okay, let's unpack that. The panel ends with a fundamental disagreement, not over whether mistakes happened, but over what those mistakes actually mean. One side argues that government incompetence, even without bad intentions, can still undermine public confidence. Because if the system allows ineligible registrations or ineligible votes, people naturally begin asking questions. The other side says, hold on, Let's not go further than the evidence allows. Yes, there was a software failure. Yes, people who shouldn't have been registered ended up on the voter rolls. And yes, some ballots were cast. But according to what we've heard, there's no evidence that the outcome of an election changed because of those votes. That's an important distinction because in today's political environment, words matter. Terms like fraud, widespread, and stolen election carry enormous weight. If we're going to use those words, they should be supported by evidence, not assumptions. At the same time, government doesn't get a free pass. Election systems should be accurate, they should be secure, and when something goes wrong, officials should acknowledge it, fix it, and explain exactly what happened. That's how trust is rebuilt. Whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent, everyone should want the same thing: an election system that is fair, transparent, secure, and worthy of the public's confidence. And with that, let's wrap things up. Whether you agree with the panel or disagree with them, one thing is clear: election integrity is too important to be reduced to political slogans. Every eligible citizen deserves the right to vote. Every election deserves public confidence, and every government has a responsibility to make sure the system is accurate, secure, and transparent. The facts matter, the evidence matters, and ultimately, that's what should guide the conversation. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think this incident exposes a deeper problem with the election administration? Or do you believe it demonstrates that the system worked because the error was discovered and corrected? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let's continue the conversation respectfully. If you enjoyed today's reaction and analysis, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who enjoys thoughtful discussions about today's biggest stories. I'm Kranky. Thank you for watching. Until next time, take care and peace out.